We're gonna do our white bread today, and if it's tacky, it means you can touch it and still pull your hands away and it's still soft, but it's not gonna be a hard, round, shiny ball. It'll just be a nice, soft ball. And we'll show you that in a little bit. So welcome to everybody. I think we've got our start at 2 o'clock now, so I'm gonna go ahead and start here. If you have any questions, please type them in. I will get to them as you go along. It takes a minute for the questions to come through and catch up to us here, and so just give us a minute. And then also sometimes I'm in the middle of describing something, and so then it will we'll have to pause for a moment to wait for a good time to talk and answer questions. But I love the questions coming through. Any questions or issues you have with the bread, please send it through, and be thinking about what you want to do next week. I have some ideas, or the week after. Please keep sending them in. I love hearing what you guys are interested in doing, and I'll keep adding them, every week as we're going through this together. So we're going to start today, and I have it written down here. Carl can close up on that. The ingredients that we're going to be needing. It was also posted on the announcement for the page, but we're going to be having, what you should have on hand in front of you is 12 ounces of water, which is 1.5 cups. You should have 1.25 ounces or 7 tablespoons of dry milk powder. If you don't have dry milk powder and you would rather just use warm milk instead, you can do 12 ounces of just warm milk. But I always use the dry milk powder, and that helps a lot. Sugar will be 1 ounce or 2 tablespoons. It's a very small amount of sugar for this. Yeast is 1/2 ounce, which is also 4.25 teaspoons. If you have the packets, it would be 2 of the packets, because each of those little packets are usually 1/4 ounce, but check your little packets and know. There is a variation between instant yeast and active dry yeast. Basically, this is for active dry yeast. If you're using instant yeast instead of active dry yeast, then you would need to use 1/4 less. So it's an adjustment. It would be instead like 3.75 or almost 4 ounces. And then it would be a little bit less there. But in general, for this small amount, you can go ahead and just do either one. For flour, we're going to be using 1.5 pounds or 5 cups. Now, depending, we talked about this last week and the week before, and we'll probably talk about it every time we use flour. Depending on how you measure your flour, it could be 5 1/3 cup. It could be 5.5 cups. So watch how we do it and judge as you go along. You just want to be aware not to try to add too much too much flour as you're going through. Try kneading it in instead and giving it time before you decide to just add flour. And then for salt, it's it's 0.4 ounces. Or easier is 2 teaspoons of salt. Butter, we have 1 ounce or 2 tablespoons. And eggs, it's 3.3 ounces or 2 regular eggs. And go ahead and put in there. So this is the ingredient list. We're going to go through the steps. If you have questions or if I'm going too fast, let me know. I kind of have a time schedule set down so we can get this all in within an hour, and we'll go there. But this is also the order that we're going to be putting the ingredients in. And this is definitely a straight mix dough. So we're going to first start with our water, and we'll have 12 ounces, or like I said, 1.5 cups. You want water that is room temperature. You don't want it hot. That's if your temperature of your room is, like 72, 73 degrees. If your rooms are cold, you'll want it a little bit warmer than that. But we're going to go ahead and put in 12 ounces of water.
Ellie wants to know if she kneads with her hand or with the mixer.
Okay, so I'm going to be showing you today. That's a great question, Ellie. I'm going to show you how to do hand kneading today, because I want to make sure those who don't have mixers also know that they can do this in their home. If you have a mixer, which is how I made all my doughs that we're going to be working with later, and how I usually make it, sometimes I just like to do it with my hands. But you can also do that. You'll put it in your mixer in the exact same order, but instead of hand kneading it, you'll just turn it on and have it knead on, if you have a KitchenAid, it's like speed 1 at first, and then you can move it up to 2 for kneading it. But we'll get to that point. But I will show you by hand. So we have the water. On top of the water, if you're doing the milk powder, then I just sprinkle that in. You don't have to mix it with this one. It's That's just an extra step if you were doing it. You don't need to do that. Then we're going to take the yeast and we're going to sprinkle that right on top of the milk powder. Well, they have sugar first on this one. It doesn't really matter. The reason I do the sugar after the yeast is I like the sugar to just push the yeast into the water. Again, so that I don't have to use, the weight of the sugar will push the yeast down into the water and it'll get it mixed in for me. And then the flour goes on top of that. So the milk powder, sugar, which is the 1 ounce of sugar, the yeast, which is a ½ ounce of yeast, and then the flour that I'm going to put in is 1 pound 8 ounces. Now, flour is an interesting thing here. If you have bread flour, or if you can find high gluten flour, if you have bread flour, then you just use 1 pound 8 ounces of bread flour. If you have high gluten flour, you would do half of that and half AP. So I'd do 12 ounces high gluten, 12 ounces AP. If you just have AP, you can use AP for this recipe. It'll have a little bit more delicate of a crumb on it, and it doesn't last as long on the shelf. So it might taste stale faster than it would if you used the bread flour. But you'll probably eat it all up, so that won't matter. If you want to also, I sometimes use the chakaata, and I made one today and I'll show that to you. Flour, which is like a wheat mix flour that they use for their chakaata, and I will use that also. So you can use a variety. I wouldn't use straight wheat flour. You could use half wheat flour and half AP flour, but for this recipe, because it's such a soft dough, do not use straight all wheat flour for it.
So Ellie asked 12 ounces of warm milk, no water.
Okay, so you can do 12 ounces of water and 1.25 ounces of dry milk, or you just do 12 ounces of milk, no water. So I wanted to make sure, because some people don't keep dry milk powder in their house, and that's really what you're making is milk. So it would be milk, it would just be 12 ounces of milk. But if you have the milk powder, then it's just an easy way to not use up all your milk in the fridge, so then you have to run to the grocery store. So that's what you would be doing. Okay, so I've put the flour in. Now on top of the flour, I'll put the salt. I'm gonna talk about this again. The reason that you separate the salt from the yeast with the flour is that you don't want to straight put the salt with the yeast. Salt is in bread dough for a couple of reasons. One is that it gives flavor, right? If you have salt, it'll enhance the flavor of what you're eating. But also, the salt is in there to inhibit the yeast activity. If you didn't have salt, your yeast would eat up all the sugars really fast and then just start growing like crazy. So we put the salt in there, but you don't want the salt to come into immediate contact. So you can do this beforehand, but I'm just gonna mix it around a little bit with my hand there, just with the flour. There we go. And then we're gonna do 2 eggs. I'm just drop them in. You can pre-mix them or you can dump them in straight. For this recipe, it doesn't matter. And then we're gonna put in the 1 ounce of butter. 1 ounce of fat is the same as 2 tablespoons, because every tablespoon is a ½ ounce for a fat. So it's an easy way to measure fats is by weight, because it's such a pain, especially with butter, to get it out. So if you weigh it, it's much easier. So that's all you do. At this point, if you're doing the mixer, you'll take your mixing bowl, you'll put it on the KitchenAid, and you will have the KitchenAid go ahead and turn it on to 1 first to get the mix going, and then turn it on to 2 and do that for 8 minutes. If not, we're gonna go at it with our hands. I'm gonna stir this one a little bit with my rubber spatula first, because it is so moist of a dough that I'm gonna kind of let my rubber spatula do the grunt work of the beginning part. And that's all I'm doing. Let's do it in there. Okay, at this point, now I'm gonna start using my hand, and I'll just scrape that off. Yep. Scrape that off. So now I have my bowl scraper. I love the bowl scraper. I've talked about it before. I will talk about it every time we do any type of baking, because it makes your life so much easier in the kitchen. I was just talking to my sister-in-law, and she was telling me how she has both these things because I had told her about it, and how excited she is for that, and that she uses the bench scraper at least 5 times a week now. Before, she never knew she needed it, but she does. So we're gonna dump it out here. And look how dry this looks. And this is what's gonna be shocking. You're gonna go, wow, this looks so dry. I'll never get this in. In just a minute, you're gonna think, oh, this is too sticky. So it takes a moment for it to go through. So now we have this dough right here on our workbench. We're gonna start doing the push and tear. You push it, and you let the dough tear. Push it and tear. This is what you're gonna do. What we're doing here is we are working with our flour, getting all the ingredients mixed in, and then once it starts getting mixed in, we're gonna try to create strong gluten strands. This is what we're doing here. This is the whole purpose of this point. Now, if you have a mixer, you save yourself a lot of this work. The mixer does it all. But you can watch it and see. It's kind of nice to do it by hand sometimes because you get a feel for what your dough should look like and how it should feel. I've had people ask me about troubleshooting before with different things, and I love helping them with troubleshooting what's going on with their bread, why it's turned out certain ways, and what's happened to it. But one of the hard things is, if you don't have a feel for what the dough should be like, it's hard to know what exactly went wrong. It's hard to know, do I need more flour? Do I need more liquid? Does it just need more mixing time? If you haven't done it by hand ever. If you just use a mixer and you don't feel, because once you get it out of the mixer, you can still feel if the dough is feeling right. And you can go, man, that's not feeling good. Now we're almost there. What you want to get this to is about 78 degrees, I think. You want to warm it up. That's another thing that kneading does for the dough, is you're warming it up to the right temperature so that it's all ready to rise. Now, as I was tearing it before, even still now, see how easy that tears? See how easy that just tears apart? That means that those gluten strands are not strong yet. They're not bouncing back. If I push down on it, it bounces back a little bit, but not enough. So I'm gonna keep working it. Now, this is a dough that if you're comfortable with this type of kneading, you can do that with. I like this because I think it's easier and I find better results with it. I can use my weight as part of the resistance on it. So it's not so much pulling as it is just push along. Let the pushing of your hands on the dough do the kneading for you. And we're gonna do this, if you're gonna do it in the mixer for 8 minutes, you need at least 8 minutes of doing it here. You wanna pay attention to what the dough is looking like because you don't wanna over knead it. You can over knead a dough. A couple things that can do to the dough is it can cause your rise to do a couple things. One, you can overheat the dough so that it rises too fast and then it overproofs because you're coming to look at it. Oh, it's getting there. It's looking really pretty. Happy dough, and it's getting warm. The other thing it can do is it can make the dough tough so that you don't get a good rise. So it can do one or the other. If it's not heated up too much and you get it too tough, it takes longer to rise. And then the yeast die. When you're making bread, you have different stages for your yeast. You moisten it. If it's dry yeast, well, you moisten it either way. It's live yeast, the same. And then you feed it with the sugar and the flour. You retard the growing with the salt. That slows the growing of the yeast. That's why if you see retard in cooking terminology, what that means is to slow. So like when you put a dough in the refrigerator, that's what if they say, oh, you need to retard the dough. It means slow the growing, slow the progress of the yeast. That will help with flavor and those things. Okay, this dough is feeling good. That's chest. Push your finger and see how it pops right back. Carl, will you do a close-up on that one?
Yep.
I'm going to show you this again. It's still a little bit tacky. See, I told you at the beginning, this isn't going to be a sticky dough. See, it doesn't stick to me, but it's tacky because it's soft. Now, when I was wanting to show you guys, so we have this beautiful loaf, and I push, and look at it bouncing back. It's coming right back on me. That's because we have strengthened the gluten, made it all strong. If it's still soft when you push down on it, as the yeast, you'll get some strengthening on the gluten on the rise, but we don't do a slow enough rise for that. So we need to do a good kneading to get the gluten strand strong enough so that when the yeast eats and creates a gas and it grows like this, that those strands stay connected so that they don't break apart, because what happens, it'll be like a balloon. If you don't have those gluten strands that are staying strong and just expanding. See, now it's pulling, see that? Before, it would break. People talk about the window pane test. What that is that you want to be able to do this and be able to see through it without it breaking. See, it's still stuck in there. The reason you want that is that your bread is going to expand. As it expands, if you don't have the right gluten strength to those connections, the strands will do this, and then they'll break. They won't have the strength to stay together and have a nice formed loaf. And if it breaks, your bread will collapse, and it will be dense, and it will also have a mealy texture to it because you don't have the chewiness of those gluten strands in your bread. You just have to have them for that type of thing. Now, there are gluten-free breads, and I'm not saying anything against it. It just isn't the same. It's just a different type of bread. And that's why, oh, this one's, it's beautiful now. See that? It's not sticking at all. We could just bounce it back and forth. If I take it, you guys saw me do this last time. If I had done this at the beginning, it would have all come apart. But now, it stays together. So I have kneaded this there. All right, I'm gonna grab my bowl back because I gotta spray it. So you just wanna spray around the bottom. If you don't have spray, you can use a little bit of oil and put it in. I put it in one side and then roll it over. And this is what it is. You'll cover this up and you'll put it on your countertop. So I'm gonna bring out the dough I made earlier so you can see what it's like. So just give me a moment. Yeah. So I'm gonna show you guys both doughs. Okay. So here we have this tight ball right here. See, it's this tight ball. I'm gonna put them on the countertop actually together. We have this tight ball, and here we have this. Now, if I push on this, it comes back. Do you see that? Here, it's risen. It still has its structure, but if I push in, it doesn't come back. It just stays down. That's because it's full of air now. So I'm going to pull this dough out. It's just gonna slide right out. And if you look at this side, come look here. We have beautiful bubbles, and look at the size difference here. This one is foamy. It's got air in it. It's like a sponge. It's just nice and soft and perfect. And this one is really hard and dense. That's how, when you push on the dough, if it's just soft going in, you know it's risen enough. And it's soft again, but it's not sticky still. See? So here we're gonna take all the air out. Now, there's certain breads that you don't do this with, but this bread is one that you do. In fact, we'll just dump it right in this bowl, and we'll set that over on the side. This bread, you want to take all the air out, because if you don't take all the air out of this bread, what's going to end up happening is you'll have a hole that started, and then it's going to go in and get proofed as the loaf, and it's going to grow bigger. And you're going to, when you slice it open, you're going to have this great big air hole in your bread, and it's just not pleasant for sandwiches. There's nothing wrong with it necessarily, it's just not nice for sandwiches. Now what I do to make sure, because this dough makes 2 loaves of bread, and what I do to make sure that my loaves are even so that I can cook them at the same time is I weigh the whole thing, and this gives me 2 pounds 11.8 ounces, or 1.243 kilograms. So I'm just going to cut that in half. So I know that I'm going to need 620 grams for 1 loaf and 620 for the other loaf. So tool, I just weigh it out there. It needs a little bit more. That's about it. Okay. And now I have my 2 doughs here that are going to make up my loaves. So what I do to make my loaf is I smash it into a rectangle. Get nice and flat, and then I know there's no air bubbles in here. Then I'm going to take it up like this, and I'm going to start to roll it. And when I roll, I pull back. And I pull back. And I just use my treasure bench paper. And then I do the same thing again. I'm going to roll. The reason I do that is because I want this to be clear of all. There we go. And I'm going to seam it. And then roll it right over there. I want this to be clear of all holes inside. So if you just kind of roll it up, you'll have a hole all the way down the center of your bread. This will go right into my prepared pan. And there's one. It's all set. Put it seam side down. Otherwise, what will happen, I didn't do that, there we go. If you don't put it seam side down, you have the seam on the side. As it rises, that seam will kind of poof out. And you'll have like a wave on the side of your bread. So you want to make sure the seam side is down. So there's one, and then I'm going to do it again to the other bread. If you notice, I have not added flour. See, no flour. Whatever flour you put down will add to the dryness of your bread. And this dough is beautiful. It doesn't need any flour. This is, especially if you've weighed it. If you're doing it by hand and you find that the 5 cups, it's still too sticky. Remember, there's a difference between sticky and tacky, and it's still too sticky. Remember, we do the seam with our weight in the, there we go, and this ridge right here, and then you roll it over. You there? And then we're going to put it right in, and we're going to proof these until they double in size. You'll cover them, you'll put them over. If your kitchen is too cool, this will take a long time. So the first rising usually takes an hour, depending on how warm your kitchen is. But anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. So check on it in 45 minutes. If it's doubled, then go ahead and get them ready to shape. Then at this point, you're going to shape them again, or you're going to shape them, sorry, and you're going to rise them for another hour. About 45 minutes to an hour, till it's doubled. Yes.
So did you do the first rise before you shape into loaves?
Yes. So I had, after I made the mix, remember I showed you the 2, the ball, you want to get it out? I actually have another one there that's frozen too. I made a lot of dough today. So this was the dough we just made here that's rising currently. This dough that we just made will go and it will rise for an hour, 45 minutes to an hour, until it's doubled in size. This dough has been in there for, yeah, almost an hour. And so it might have a little bit longer. The one that I made these out of were in there for an hour. I took them out, split it, and then shaped it. I'll go ahead and do the same with this again so you can see another shaping. Will you put this back in there, honey? You'll want to cover them with a plastic wrap or a towel so that it doesn't dry out to the air. And then you're going to put them away for, check on them after 45 minutes because you never know the temperature of your kitchen.
And then how do you know if you have too much flour?
Okay. So if you have measured by weight, it is exactly 1 pound 8 ounces. If It's if you want to measure, if you have a scale, you can see how you measure. You can weigh a cup of flour and see. Standardized is that 1 cup of flour is 4.5 ounces, which would technically mean that you would need 5 1/3 cups of ounces for this recipe. But that being said, most people, when they measure their flour, they measure it heavy, meaning it's more than 4.5 ounces. That's why I cut it down to 5 cups. If your dough, I was showing you the dough before. Actually, I'm going to have to get that out for me again. I'll show you the dough so you can see what it should look like. And this is one of the hard things about doing it online and not being there in person, to help you feel what the dough should be like. But it will be, see how soft that is? I mean, it's just soft. It just falls down. This dough's like, I've been handled enough. It's soft. It's still soft, but it's not gonna stick to my hands. Now, if you have remnant of dough left on your hand, that dough will grab that dough and it'll be sticky. So make sure when you're testing it that your hands are clean, that you've either rubbed it off or you've washed it off and then dried your hands. But it should, when you're done kneading it, it should be tight, meaning you can make this type of a top on it. See how tight that is? And it shouldn't stick to your hands. See, I can do this and nothing sticks. If you're doing this and it's just sticky, then test to see if you've kneaded it enough. If you pull it and it's, see how this is just wanting to stay together? That is because those gluten strands are really strong. If you've kneaded it and you have strong gluten, but yet it's really sticky, add more flour to it. If not, you probably just need to knead it a little bit longer. And that takes experience. Be patient with yourselves. One of the reasons that you want to get a feel for what the dough should be like, when you first, even after mixing it for 8 minutes, when you scrape it out and put it down, it feels sticky because it's still sticking. But once you take your hands and kind of do this thing to it, you'll see, oh, okay, it's coming, it's together. It's not gonna stick to my hands. And especially if, when you put it in the bowl to rise, then it goes like that. It really does take practice though. Practice this. This is a really simple bread recipe and it's really reliable. Like each time I make it, it's always reliable. You can always, of course, learn from experiences into where, oh, maybe I'll do this better next time, those type of things, but it makes a really good white, soft bread. I always think of it as almost like cake. I put Nutella on it or jam and butter, and it just sort of reminds me of cake because it's just soft and it melts in your mouth, and it's just pillowy the way it turns out from there. Does that help at all? Just be really slow in adding flour. Put the 5 cups in, you know, work that in, and then I would do maybe 2 tablespoons at a time. Don't go over a 1/2 cup more though. That is the max more that I would put in is 5 1/2 cups. 5 1/3 is the actual amount that would be with the calculations. Again, it just depends on how you measure flour. So start with 5. If you're just finding it still so sticky, then slowly put in. Yes.
So when I use AP flour, my dough is perfect. When I use strong white flour, today my dough is super sticky. Not even a dough. I even added more flour and still sticky. Something wrong with my flour.
It could be, did you use a mix of AP and strong flour? Because it depends on the strong white flour, like what percentage of protein is it? I have found that the high gluten flour that I get here, if I just use it, my bread doesn't have the right structure to it. And I always mix it with, to make bread flour, I mix it with the AP flour. It just depends on what your percentages are. So you're going to be looking for, so AP flour usually has protein-wise, I think it's like 11.6. There's a variance between it. High gluten can be up to 13, and that's percentage of protein. Like that's what they're saying is in there. That's what you're looking at to see. If it's not working, then I would add when you're adding extra flour to it, I would add the AP flour. If you're using the high gluten and it's not working, look at the percentages on that high gluten and see where it's at. I don't know which brand you're using, so that might help too. But I always find that my doughs handle better for me when I use the high gluten or a bread flour from that. So it also depends on the things. And I mean, I don't know if you're doing the exact same thing you've done before, then that might be a indication that it's the flour from that. But this is it is a soft dough. It's just, it shouldn't be sticky at this point where you're going through. Does that help? See if they answer any questions there. I'm going to weigh this dough again.
She said no, she just used strong.
Okay. What percentage of...
What's the percentage?
It should say...
Angela used 2 cups of wheat flour and the rest bread flour, and it seemed a bit dry.
So, wheat flour is, if you're using... there we go. Have you mixed it all in there already and gotten it all together as a dough and the dough seems dry? Wheat flour generally takes a little bit more. Usually I always use half wheat flour, and I'll show you my one I did today with the chocolate one, which is kind of that mixture. If I use wheat flour, then I'll do half wheat flour, and then I would do maybe you could do a quarter AP and a quarter of the bread. But I've done that before. I'm not sure on that one. If it appears dry, maybe your eggs might be smaller. Maybe they're not the large eggs. You would slowly add liquid in. If you get out and it's dry when you're doing that mixer thing, you can slowly put in. What I would do at that point is I would open it up, like when you're kneading it and you're feeling like it's too dry and it's not coming together. Open it up, put the liquid in the center. If you put it on the outside, it will just stay on the outside because the gluten forms that kind of thing where it's not going to want to mix in. Put it in the center and fold it over and work it in that way. If you need to add a little bit more liquid to it. So see here, we have another loaf and another one. Now these ones, will you get out the ones that are risen? They should be pretty happy now. They're not quite double yet. The ones those ones that I did before, those ones we just put in.
The ones you did before?
Yeah, bring those up. So these have risen, they've only been rising for about 30 minutes now, and they're getting there. I can feel the softness in them. They need a little bit longer. I like them because I know my bread pans, I like them to get just a little bit above, but I can feel that they're soft. They're just a little bit too firm still. So they're gonna need about, I don't know, another 10 to 15 minutes to get before you'll put them back in there. So these ones I'm actually gonna redo here because I only actually have, shockingly enough, 4 of these big bread pans, so I have smaller ones. And you can do in there, instead of doing the 2 1 pound loaves, where really they're like 1 pound 5 ounce loaves, you can do 3 or smaller ones. So I like these ones to be 13 ounces in them, is what I get. So I'm going to measure out. Yeah. And I could also measure that and see how much, oops, see, that's still a pound from there. So we're going to make this a little bit more. What I should have done was measured it and then, yeah. There we go. Okay, so now I have all sorts of pieces here, and I'm going to make it pretty again. Go through. The ones that I showed you are half wheat flour because that chocolate has, there we go. The issues I have with the wheat flour here in this country is that the way it's cut is really, it's not soft, they're sharp, and they tend to deflate the dough. Because as it raises the dough, see as I'm pulling, I'm going to show you this a lot because I want you to really get down how to do this one. There we go. As the dough raises, it's soft and beautiful and has that, and then those wheat, even though it looks soft, they're sharp and they're cutting it because they're not using it a lot of them, to do this type of soft bread. My helper was telling me the other day that in the Philippines they call this type of bread American bread. Not sliced bread, not white bread, but American bread. Because not a lot of other places in the world have this soft bread. Europe likes and they're beautiful, the European breads, and they do have some soft breads, but they like their breads to be the crusty hard on the outside, which are delicious. This one's already shaped, so. But I can show it to you again if you need to see that one again. I'll show it to you this way. Here we go. Punching out all the holes. Punching out all the holes. But if your dough is sticky and unmanageable, do add, tablespoon at a time, add more flour, and then work it in, work it in, work it in. For dishes, it's awesome for getting your things going, but the scraper is really what I would highly recommend for all of those things. So it's the ultimate child cheater. The other thing I recommend is a bench scraper for a couple things. I showed when I made the cinnamon rolls that it's great for cutting, and even though it's a blunt, it's not a sharp edge, because it's narrow and goes through, it will cut right through. It's really great for cutting your doughs so that you're not using a knife, you're not having to, you know, deal with that. You don't have to worry about, this is Formica topping for this. You know, I don't worry about on the marble so much, but for Formica here, also the marble is slippery, so if you're using a knife to cut dough, it can slip and be dangerous. This, if it slips, I mean, it might hurt, but it's not gonna cut me ever. So it's great for cutting. It's great for cleaning off. You can get everything cleaned off and done. I highly recommend any kitchen shop. I think you can even get this. I mean, I know Walmart will have these things, but here in Abu Dhabi, I believe you could probably get these things at some of the Lulus and the Carrefours. I know the kitchen shops have them because we've gotten them there before. I think the one that we got here, I believe we bought this one here. And this one, it works great too. This is my favorite one. I've used this for probably 15 years. This one I got a little bit ago. It's not as durable as that one, but it still works, and it's great. It'll scrape everything off, and I love having it. The other tool we're going to use here in just a moment, and I had it out. Let me see there it is a thermometer. The reason being is that your bread crust can look beautiful, and it can look browned and golden, and you can tap it and think, okay, it feels like it's done. And then you take it out and you let it cool and you slice it open, only to realize either it's underdone or it could be overdone, or it might be perfect. But the only way to know for sure is to take the temperature of your bread. And they'll depend on the bread. For this soft white bread, you're gonna want it to be 180 degrees Fahrenheit for it to be done. Celsius, what's that in Celsius? Do you know, Carl?
What's that?
180 Fahrenheit. We do a little, I don't want to do calculations right now in my head. But it's 180 degrees Fahrenheit. The internal of this soft bread is finished. If it goes to 190, that's fine. But if you start going up to 200, 210, then you're going to have a drier bread. You want this one between 180 and 190. And that's why, like I said, in 20 minutes when I check it and I take the temperature, I can tell, okay, it's either done or it needs just a few more minutes, and then I can take it out. You'll have a little hole.
About 82 degrees.
Yeah, about 82 degrees Celsius. So you'll have a little hole where you checked it, but that's, you know, it's not noticeable terribly on it. And if you do two, you only have to check one, because obviously they're gonna probably be the same, cooking in the same oven. If you're using the, if you're doing like crunchy breads, like any of the artisan breads, usually those you want to have about 2 to 210 internal temperature, because you want a dryer. You don't want that soft moistness inside. You want it to be nice and dry inside and chewy. So it depends on the bread. But this one that we're making today should be 180, or I think Carl said 180 Fahrenheit or 82 Celsius. Be 82 to 85 probably Celsius. 180 to 190 Fahrenheit for an internal temp for these to be done. That's the same temperature if I'm doing my dinner rolls, the soft ones, then I check it there also. And it's a great way to know that it's done internally inside. Any questions I've missed?
Nope.
Nope. Okay, let's take a look at the bread right now. And I will show you the beauty of it. And you'll see how it's risen. So what happens with the yeast is that when it first comes in, it starts getting really active in the oven. It's going to be getting warm, and they're going to start super fast eating and having gas. That's what they're going to have. So your bread is going to raise up at the first little bit. And then...
How long do you usually bake it for?
About 20 minutes.
About
for
20.
This size, 20 minutes. And then when it hits temperature, then it's going to, the yeast will die, but you'll have your crust, and then it will be cooking the dough inside. But you want to have that nice rise first, where it rises up, it gets its shape, and then the yeast is dying. Now it dies slowly because it's going to die outside first, the outside part of the bread, and then it'll start dying on the inside as it hits that temperature as it goes in. And so it'll continue rising a little bit on the inside. You'll get those holes and things. This one is going to be a more dense bread because I used the chocolate flour for these ones. They're not the white bread ones that we did earlier. Those are still rising, and I will show you those. They're not quite ready yet for rising. They're just barely the top. They probably have about another 15 minutes for rising there. This is my proofer. You don't have to have a proofer. This is just my proofer.
Ellie said you're a murderer.
I'm a murderer because I'm killing the yeast. Yeah, yeast are live creatures, right? They are creatures. They are alive. That's why if you have a sourdough, you have to feed it or it will die. But that's what makes the bread. If you don't, have yeast, you're not going to get this bread. It's like this nice, luscious bread from there. Even when you're cooking with sourdough, you're cooking with yeast. That's just live yeast is what sourdough is. When people ask what is live yeast? Well, it's basically that they've made a sourdough, and it's a natural yeast that they've compacted it though. It's like a really dry, and they haven't allowed it to ferment. They've just allowed the yeast to grow. And so that's how you get those sourdoughs there. Any burning questions about breads, about these type of breads? Things that have frustrated you in the past or that have gone wrong, that have not worked out for you? What's going on today? Anything that you're finding? I know we talked about the sticky and we talked about the dry. Again, if it's sticky, just add 1 tablespoon. Slowly add flour until it doesn't come off on your hand. It should still be tacky, but not sticky. I think of the difference of that as, tape, when you have put it onto something and then you've taken it off, it's still a little tacky, but it's not going to totally adhere. That's what I think of for this dough, is that it's not going to just stick all over your hands, but it'll just be where it's tacky there from that. Some of the questions, I have my whole troubleshooting chart here, and then I also have my experience, so anything you'd want to know, I can go through some of these things. Like we talked about the large holes in the bread. That's if you didn't do the punch down right, if you didn't do your roll correctly, you can get the holes in there, but that can also be from overproofing, where you got a great big hole in the center. But a lot of times that will end up collapsing if you overproof it. If the center collapses in also from there. If the crust has little blisters on it, like you feel like it's not smooth, but it's got like these little blisters on the crust, there are different reasons for that. But it could have to do with if it's humid, it can cause those, but it can also be too much liquid in the dough. So if you have too much hydration, then it can get those blisters on it. But it can also be from the steaming. This type of bread should not be steamed or heated. The steaming or having the steam in it is to get that nice crust on the outside.
Is there any way to revive an overproof bread?
Okay, so that's a tricky question. So yes, you can. So if your bread is overproofed and you want to retry it, you can punch it down. It's going to go slower the next time though, because yeast doesn't have an infinite, you've got it there. You have to refeed it because it's eaten what's there. And that's the whole issue. Like so I'll talk about it with sourdough. If I have a sourdough starter, you can grab one of mine out and I'll go ahead. Can you grab one of my sourdough starters out? Yeah. If I were to feed my sourdough starter and leave it out on the counter for a week and then try to use it, it's not going to rise because it's eaten up all the food that I gave it. You have to feed it on a regular basis, and you'll be able to tell because it's got these little bubbles in it. And my sourdough right now is asleep because it's been in the fridge, but it'll have these little bubbles here, and that's where it's let off the gas, and right in here from that. So if your stuff overproofs and then you punch it down and have it go again, well, the yeast has already eaten all the sugar that you've put in the bread and let off the gases, and it's eaten those things. Now there's still flour in it. I'm sure there's still stuff in there. It'll just be a slower rise. It'll have a flavor to it that's not original. So yes, you can punch it down and do it, but that doesn't mean that it won't have some troubleshooting to go with that. So it just depends on the issue. You could punch it down, try it. It would be a longer rise for the next rise. There are doughs that I have where I actually proof them and then I fold them and put them back and let them rise again, and then I fold it, and it's like a whole couple days thing where the yeast is continually eating what's there, and it just keeps eating it what's there. So you can punch it down, but it also then develops a flavor because the yeast gases are developing a flavor as it goes through. So it might have a little bit of a variated flavor to it at that point. I'm going to show you the bread again. Oh, it's so pretty, pretty, pretty. Look at this golden brown. This is the caramelizing that is happening on our bread right here. Can you see through there pretty good? So we've got the browning of it, which is the caramelizing of the dough. I still think it's got a little bit of time left. So a couple things you could have done, and I didn't talk about this earlier. If you want that glossy top to it and it has a little bit of crunch on the outside, then you could egg wash the top of the dough before you put it in the oven. And what that would be would just be mixing, let me see where I am on time so I can see if I need to check the temperature. If you wanted to, no, it's got a couple more minutes and then we'll get it out. If you wanted to put an egg wash on it, it would get a glossy covering over it. If you want to, mine, I like to have a nice soft buttery top. So when I take this out, I'm going to go ahead and brush butter over the top, which will soften the crust a bit. And then that's how I like it, is soft and buttery for this particular bread. If it were a Kaiser roll or something with a hard crusty, a French bread, then I would want the hard crusty outside. Not to say I would always egg wash those, they all take different topping, but for this one you could just do a quick egg wash over the top and have it in there, and it would be really pretty shiny thing on there. So I'm gonna get out my cooling rack so that I'm prepared. I like to take my bread out of their out of the bread pans right away because I don't like the steam effect on it. There are some bread pans where you leave them on the pans and it's perfectly fine and it doesn't, when you do that, it aerates. But I found with my bread pans that I have here that they collect steam inside and make the bottom of the bread dough soft. And these ones have a structure to where I don't have to cool them in the pans. There are other bread recipes where you would need to cool them in the pan to maintain structure. Brioche, for example, is one because they can collapse easily if it doesn't cool down because it's still delicate inside. But this one is not one that collapses when it comes down. So I'm going to check the temperature of the dough, of the bread, and I will bring one out and show you how I do that. I think it's about done. You can also tell by the smell. Oops, did you shut that? Of the bread. So here we have our bread, and you can check in the side. I always just stick it right down the center. And it's an instant read thermometer. It goes up, so we've got it just about there. And we're gonna brush the tops with butter, and then we'll take it out from there. This is a pretty, now this one's darker than what yours will be if you use the white flour. I'm gonna get my butter out and my pastry brush. I highly recommend using a pastry brush that is not like, there's the thin ones. When you go to buy a pastry brush, pull on the bristles to make sure they're not going to pull out, because I have gone through so many pastry brushes where I'm putting it in and I'm brushing it on, all of a sudden there's little bristles all over my bread and dough, and it's just a huge pain. So I'm going to pop this out so you can see it. And our oven is, our kitchen is all warm from the, oh, it needs just a moment. There we go. I want to make sure it gets, there it's still hot. What the steam does do to help, there we go, is it helps to push it away from the sides of the pan. So there we have our beautiful bread. Should we cut a piece? I think we should cut a piece. I think we should cut a slice. And then later I'll get on and I'll do a little video where I show you how I'm cutting the white bread. Because it's not ready yet for this. But when I cut my bread, this is too hot really to cut right now, but I'm going to cut it so you guys can see it. But I put it on its side. If you cut from this side, you're going to press down. So I put it on the side. I also cool all of my breads on their side like this. It helps keep it from collapsing because the structure was made up and down, and then if I put it on the side, it just helps it cool and not collapse it all there. So I will get out my bread knife, and then I'm just gonna, beautiful. Okay, look at that. It's soft. This is the one that's the half wheat. We've got this soft center. This needs some jam, I think. Should we get some jam out?
Oh, your live event ended.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Oh, it did already? Oh, because we started it before. Okay. Did they get to see the pictures of it? You can start it again in a minute. Just do it there. I'm going to throw this back in. Oh, there we go. Right here. All right. So this is what we have. I'm going to put some butter on it.
Okay, so now I got to do, hold on.
Oh, we're going to wait for a moment for our Instagram to come back up. This, if you can get, is delicious. If you can't get homemade raspberry jam or any jam, this jam is one of my favorites. It's, I think this is made in France. Yeah, this is made in France. If you can get this or something like it, it's a perfect complement for this beautiful, lovely, lovely bread. So I'm just gonna smother it with some butter. And then we're gonna smother it with some more jam. And look at that, who could resist this? The kids know they can't come in here right now because the video's on, but I guarantee you, as soon as they hear that it's over and it's done, they're gonna come running in because they know there's fresh bread. And then they'll be quiet for a while because all they're gonna be doing is eating and stuffing their faces, and it's delicious. Enjoy your bread, guys. Send me any questions that you have. Thank you.